Apple's September event where they traditionally launch all the new iPhones, etc. A lot of interesting things there. I know there's an argument around the updates are becoming a lot more iterative these days. The Pro line got probably the most of the love with the camera update. And things like the dynamic island, hilariously called. I thought that was where they come up with these names. I don't know. That's apparently added functionality to the pill-shaped cutout, as it had been called in the rumors, etc. I mean, okay, and that's something to make it look different to the previous ones, I guess. The regular iPhones didn't get as much attention, although the Mini was swapped out with a plus-sized model because larger phones are the sort of the option of choice for a lot of people. But before we get into some of that, I did want to touch on this concept of Apple moving away from super cycles. So the idea that, for instance, in the earlier days with earlier iPhones, there were like the iPhone 6 in particular had a super cycle. There was such a pent up demand for a larger screen iPhone, and that was the first larger screen iPhone that was available. And it saw a spike in demand. It was the biggest selling model by far up until that point by a wide margin. But then that led to a dip the following year in terms of sales because so many people upgraded in the 6 super cycle, as it was called. Now it seems what's happening is obviously they gotten onto this, and I think they want no super cycle to be there because they just want people buying iPhones all the way through the year constantly as they have a need to upgrade. And that's kind of the impression I'm getting with the successive releases of the iPhone is that if you look at the like the 12, 13, and 14 ostensibly look the same. There are hardware changes in there, but nothing too drastic. But instead of, say, you upgrading from the previous year's phone or maybe a 2-year-old phone, the iPhone 14, for instance, is now, I guess, geared towards the iPhone owner from 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So anyone that's, got an iPhone 10 or an iPhone 11 or earlier than that. And that's kind of where Apple's going, it seems.
Yeah, part of it could be component driven, um, but part of it just seems to me, really what more can they pack in? They're putting in the incremental hardware upgrades and trying to find features for them. If you ask me, I I don't know. I'm a bit underwhelmed. Maybe that was the argument you were referring to, the one we had before we got on. I'm quite underwhelmed. I mean, I don't need a super cycle, but I need to feel that, you know, the phone that I've got is somehow moving forwards. Apple is good at that. The software upgrades will keep my 13 relevant. Um, but I didn't see anything, that would make me rush out and buy a phone unless I absolutely needed one. So maybe, but even if I absolutely needed one, I'd be waiting another 12 months now for the 15.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't taken your advice on that one, only because I'm gonna upgrade to the 14 from my 12. So this will be the last time that we'll be using the 12 Pro Max to film this SciTech Culture episode. I should have it by next Friday, so I'll be able to put that 48 megapixel camera to use for our for our episodes going forward. So we'll see how we go with that.
Well, that's right. Look, there is always an incremental increase on Apple products, but and maybe where we are too focused on super cycles or new features. But look, even the sort of dynamic island, always on screen, this sort of stuff has been on Android devices for a while. It To me, it adds functionality to the phone, so great, but it should have been something that would be expected. I don't see it as a selling point.
Well, I think we've moved past that now because arguably the explosion in features was in the first half of the iPhone's history. And yes, Android makers like Samsung typically push the envelope. They even literally changed design language year on year. And as a joke too, Apple being behind, Samsung's released an ad, with the tagline 48 megapixels, you're almost there, Apple. We've had 108 megapixels for 2 years, 6 months, and 4 days. So it's I can see where, but maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's just part of the market. Maybe you've got uh, it seems like Apple's comfortable with the idea of being the phone for people who are not looking at this stuff, who just want the phone. And the Android makers, if you want the bleeding edge with a lot of new features and changes, etc., especially at the top end, then you go the Android phone.
Look, you're absolutely right, but I think that Apple's getting squeezed a bit here. So Apple used to be a phone which was a one-stop shop. On my Android phones, I can still get mountable media. So if I need an extra 256 gig, I can just pop it in the slot and I can take it out and I can read it. And I can do that quicker than you can get that out of an Apple phone. We're going to higher and higher megapixel cameras. Apple have got the feature, even though it's not activated, as you were telling me before, with the ultra wide to allow for 8K video. They're going to have to release the 15 with a USB-C port. I mean, there's no other way if they go to 8K video, and because they've only got minimum onboard storage, and there's no way to get it off quickly. So I wonder if there's a bit of a squeeze now. Probably if you're an Apple user, traditional Apple user who just likes the good quality, ease of use video, you don't really care about what Samsung's got. You're very happy with what you've got on the iPhone. But we're now at a point where at some stage I'm going to need to get that off. And if I'm shooting in 8K, I mean, that's going to burn up gigs a minute. So
I was going to say too, and we were talking about it before we got on about the value proposition, and this is purely at the top end because a lot of the Samsung phones are probably the direct equivalent on the Android side of the iPhone, and they cost just as much. But they've actually removed removable storage and all that stuff as well, which I think is interesting. But they probably still have an easier way to get it off the phone than what Apple does, and that's just why it's kind of a mixed bag, I guess, when you look at it in terms of what's available. And what they're making available. One thing, like the keynote, was very strange to me because apart from being very long, they actually were focusing on some very niche features like car crash detection and emergency satellite connections, which are they're a nice thing to include there, but they did spend an excessive amount of time going through these features that might be great if it happens. We don't want to be in a car crash, of course, but if you happen to be in one, are you going to have one every week where this is going to happen, kind of thing? I mean, it's a nice thing. I'm not knocking it, but it's also they chose to focus so much on it. But it might be because they didn't have anything else to say.
well, I tend to agree, and to be honest, there's a lot of car crashes every day, and you wonder that's great that Apple is going to contact someone to let you know that potentially you're not well or something, but are our emergency services primed to cope with all these automated messages? I wonder what's the knock-on effect of that. I must say, the idea of being able to access satellite comms in an emergency is fantastic as well. And hopefully, all that means is that if I am out somewhere hiking or something like that, I'm going to be late, I can still send a text to say, don't worry about me. But if it's going to go to the emergency services, then I wonder really what the functionality of that is, except the emergency services receiving an extra 100 texts each weekend saying I'm okay, don't come and get me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Apple also threw in that service would only be free for the first 2 years as well, and then presumably they're going to start charging for it. Which the implication is that they apparently have a back end that they're setting up for it themselves.
Which I would then say that that would mean that in a place like Australia, it won't matter where you'll be, you'll always be able to send a text. Maybe
Yeah,
that's a feature worth waiting for in the iPhone 16.
absolutely. I guess one other thing I wanted to mention, the 13 mini is still around. For those that still want the small phone, I thought that was interesting that they left it in the lineup. I almost thought they were going to axe that given the poor sales and whatnot, but they
Got so many left over, Ben. They probably pre-ordered too many.
Yep, that's right. Got to keep them punching through. And The only other thing would be the 14 plus. I guess is I actually think that's got a certain value to it in the sense that it's the first time they've offered a big screen phone, but at a lower price point. I've no doubt there'll be a lot of people that'll probably snap that up because previously you had to get the Pro Max to get the larger screen size. So it kind of makes sense why they would do that, especially in the light of how poorly I guess the Mini did in previous cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, while I probably, a year or two ago would have said the Mini was the phone for me, by today's standards, it's just too small. And so, I think, you know, yeah, I'm not surprised to see it go, to be quite honest. It looks small and dinky, and there's really no place for it in the modern age.
Absolutely. Before we move on to our last topic, also just wanted to mention there was a new Apple Watch that was released, which I thought was interesting for two reasons. One was how durable, I guess, they decided to make it, for the extreme user, the one, people that dive to 100 meters or they're in ultra marathons or they're running through a desert. Like they had all the images in the keynote of all these people doing all these crazy things in snowstorms and whatnot. And this watch could actually, take it. It's for that user. And they didn't overprice it considering what it could have been priced at in terms of the lineup. So I thought that was an interesting addition to the lineup and a way to, I guess, maybe invigorate some more interest in the Apple Watch itself, because the Series 8, which is the I guess the normal one that normally gets released, virtually no changes compared to last year. So and I guess one other aspect I wanted to mention on that Apple Watch Ultra, it's clear that Johnny Ive is no longer at the company because it's not a pretty looking watch.
Well, I've never had a Apple Watch. I always thought or assumed that it must be reasonably durable because they always show people swimming, running, walking, climbing, etc., with them. So I I wonder if there's so little new on the Apple Watch that they just took an angle, that, that they could, which is say it was more durable. I would have thought that the technology on the Apple Watch would always have lent itself to durability. I haven't seen too many of them smashed or people complaining about them, as I have Fitbit. So who knows?
And maybe that they're trying to compete with Garmin or something like that as well. But
Could be, but I tell you what, the best watch is a Chorus watch. That's my recommendation.
absolutely, absolutely. And the only other thing that was of note to announce product-wise was the second generation AirPods Pro. Like I've got the original ones, and they're great. The additional functionality around like better noise cancellation, better transparency mode, and sort of additional functionality within those modes as well, which is kind of a core feature for a device like that, was welcome. So that was kind of nice that they included that, and it's an obvious accompaniment to the iPhone in terms of two products going together. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people buying both sets at the same time.
Well, that's right, but I mean, yeah, I still haven't forgiven Apple for removing the earphone.
Oh, the headphone jack, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely.